make a speech, if that's okay.
As long as it's short.
My fellow Americans. Hi, my name is Rob Lopresti, and I am so glad to see all of you. I am the map librarian here, and you are sitting in the map collection. We have a couple 100,000 maps. People ask, where are our maps? And the answer is, what map areas we have maps from? And the answer is all over the world, but the closer you are to Bellingham, the more maps you're going to find, which makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Some of our maps are in the collection, in the catalog. Some of ours are not yet. So if you're looking for a map and you don't find it in the collection, that doesn't mean we don't have it. You can come here and ask. My business card and Dennis's card. Dennis is the guy who actually knows what's going on around here. They're both over there next to a sign-up sheet. If you sign up on the sheet, you will get notices about these lectures and anything else exciting that we happen to be doing. These lectures are called Speaking of Maps, and it's an opportunity to show you some of the resources we have and some of the other things that can be done with traditional cartographic materials, such as we have here. And we do one of these a quarter, except in the summertime. This would be a fantastic opportunity for you to take this guy out of your pocket and turn it off, or at least turn the sound off. So think about doing that, please. So let's go right into okay, I mentioned there's a sign-up sheet. People have occasionally asked me, oh, by the way, we're open 11 to 3, Monday to Friday. You're welcome to come in during those times. You can also call us up and say, that time doesn't work, can we make an appointment for another time? And we'll try to accommodate you, because we're wonderful people. And if you're faculty members, by the way, you are welcome to arrange with us to bring in one of your classes for a tour. Okay? That is a thing we're very happy to do. We also have wireless down here now, which we didn't have a year ago. That makes us happy too. Okay, so someone has asked me about donations. You know, you can donate to the university, you can donate to the library, you can also donate to the map collection. We have a foundation, a Western Foundation grant. Someone donated some money recently, for which we are very grateful. So that's something you can talk to me about if you want to. Now, let's get to the main event. Bert Weber is a professor emeritus of geography and environmental social sciences. He came to Western in 1970. Is it true you're a founding member of Huxley College?
I was here at the beginning.
He was here at the creation. Yeah. So that's 46 years ago. Wow. And I have this whole stuff about the Salish Sea and your involvement in it. I'm just going to let you talk about that if you don't mind.
It's good.
And so I will say he is a founding member of Western Salish Sea Studies Institute, which is cool too. So let's give him a big welcome.
Delightful to see a bunch of young faces. So my first question is, how many of you are here because you're required to be here? Just a really good friend and my wife. The rest of you the rest of you came because you were interested in some way or another? How many of you have known about the Salish Sea for more than 3 months? Most everybody? Incredible. Some of you it's newer? Good. Well, I want to be able to speak to all of you. So the Salish Sea is a new kind of discovery. It's a new name. It's a new place, something that didn't really exist before. And I've had the wonderful opportunity to be part of the process of naming of it. Most people don't know about it. Recently I went across the border into Canada, and the border guide and the Canadian gave me the regular kinds of questions, no tobacco, no guns. And then he said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm going over to the Sydney Aquarium to do a meeting in the Salish Sea. And I said, have you heard of that? He looked stunned and just suspicious, as if there was something that, I was glad to get out of there anyway. He didn't know about it. Most people don't know about it. It's a new kind of thing. There are 7 million of us that live on the shores of the Salish Sea. And I would say the great bulk of them, 5 million, 6 million, have no idea what it's all about. So it's really a pleasure for me to be amongst an elite audience that knows the Salish Sea. We are the elite. And there's, with 5 different things that I'd like to do today. I have to talk about the map because, right, this is a map library, so there must be a map involved, and we will do that. And I also want to share with you my reasons for suggesting the name of the Saley Sea way back when. And that's both a personal kind of statement and also a scientific statement. So we'll do that as well. Then I'm going to describe to you the process. If you want a place named, there is a very tedious bureaucratic process that you have to go through. The government does not give out names to go on maps very easily. But you want a name on a map, you got to do it. So we'll talk about that process and the time that it takes. And then I want to clarify with you who really gets the credit for first formally adopting the name Saley Sea. And there is a delightful little story that. And then finally I want to end with a request to you to invite you to think about iconic images of the Saley Sea, because there is a very, very large job in having people understand the Saley Sea as a place they identify with. So that's what we're going to do. And at some point I just wrote down all the things that I thought I was going to wander through in the talk, in no particular order at all. So if you want to zone out, you can just look through there. And I should probably talk about all of those things by the end of the talk. If there's any time you want me to speak out, please do so, and I will. And for sure, if I don't cover them all, nail me at the end. First, so I would like to recognize one of the people. There's not very many of the people that are listed there that are here today, but the one who's probably most important for our purpose, Stephen Freeland from Huxley College, who is sitting over here in the corner and is responsible for the map that we're going to look at almost immediately. So, definitely immediately. Okay, so we have a map. And maps are what? Maps are for identifying places. And if you don't have a place and the name of a place, then you can't know it, right? Humans are like that. The first thing we want to do when we want to understand something is to name it. Each other, things, concepts. Names are the glue that holds our understanding of the lives we live together. And a map is a place where you find names. So here is our map of the Saley Sea. And what I'd like to do is first talk about what the Saley Sea is. Number one question, what is this thing? Okay, the very easy answer, it's the Strait of Juan de Fuca, Puget Sound, and Georgia Strait. Easy. And when I went to see Stephen, this is quite a long time before it was adopted as a formal name. I said, there's this place, and I'd like to have a map of it, and is there any chance maybe you could get your class to do such a map? And he said, no, I want to do it. And he did in about 3 weeks, and it is still the iconic map of the Saley Sea. There are others, and there's one over here that the map library has, which is really very interesting. It's made out of thin wooden sheets and shows the bathymetry of it. It's got a few errors in it, but it is otherwise a lovely map. But this is the one that's the standard. Okay, so Strait of Georgia. See, I can do this without blocking everybody's view. Strait of Georgia to the north, Puget Sound to the south, Strait of Juan de Fuca to the west. That's the simple part. But if you look at it a little bit more closely and start to ask the question about whether the name applies to things really well, it gets a little more complicated. Like, where is the southern boundary of the Strait of Georgia? If you go look at it, Strait of Georgia starts off at Saturna Island over here, and you draw a line to, well, we don't even have them there, to Peytos Island, then Susha Island, then the tip of Lummi Island. Anyway, you can see that line across there. There's all this water in the San Juan Islands that each body of water has a name, right? You can find a name for the little bays and for the straits and the harbors, but there's no overarching name. It doesn't belong to the Strait of Juan de Fuca, because the Strait of Juan de Fuca comes in over to Whidbey Island, and it doesn't belong to Puget Sound for sure. And the islands don't belong to the Strait of Georgia. And that's a relatively recent thing. Vancouver was the one that named the Strait of Georgia, but he didn't call it the Strait of Georgia, he called it the Gulf of Georgia. And the reason that he did that was he wanted to be able to apply to the names inside these islands. For reasons I don't fully understand, because I'm really not a geographer, is that a strait shouldn't have big things, big island complexes in it. And the other thing is, if you look carefully, try to figure out what did Vancouver mean when he named the Strait of Georgia, it appears that he was thinking about it going all the way down into what we now call Puget Sound. So there's nuances about that in the southern part. In the northern part, it's simpler. It's the place where the waters change. If you go north, if you've had the delightful experience of being able to go up north through Seymour Narrows or Denton and Green Narrows, you go through Narrows, things change very rapidly. In the northern part of the Saley Sea, the dominant conifer is Douglas fir, and there are lots of arbutus trees, or madronas, as they're called in this country. And there are oak trees as well. As far up as Denman Island, you can find oak trees. You go north of here, things change totally. The conifer becomes spruce. You lose the arbutus trees. There's no more oak trees. There's no more maple trees. It changes totally. It's a very different climate. And so we have this northern part that goes through a series of islands. Where is the boundary of the Saley Sea? Well, Stefan did this one. I didn't have the courage to say what's going to happen up there. But he said, let's just take it all the way up here and include Butte Inlet, which is interesting. This big inlet, the British Columbia government does not recognize as part of the Saley Sea because they have plans to put power plants up there. And they didn't want anything that could interfere with it being used in the way they wanted to use it, so they left that off. And someday there will be an international incident about whether the Butte Inlet should or should not be part of the Saley Sea, but I don't think any of us will be around for that. Okay, so that's the Strait of the boundary of the Strait of Georgia. The Strait of Juan de Fuca, that's really simple. Nobody really knows where it ends. It's out there in the ocean somewhere. And definitely, though, on our side it's pretty clear. It's Cape Flattery. But where it ends on the BC side is not as clear, and there is little uncertainty about that. Okay, let's have a look at Puget Sound. We've got a little slowness here. See if we can get that. There we go. That's what I wanted. Puget Sound. All right, let's go back to the beginning and ask the question of what Vancouver meant when he named some of this body of water after Peter Puget, who he sent off on a really interesting voyage, because Vancouver was anchored up here. He wanted to see what was going on down there because he was looking for the Northwest Passage. He had to look on every body of water. So he sent Peter Puget down all the way to the bottom. And he named Puget Sound as that body of water south of Tacoma Narrows, which we have right here. This is Puget Sound. And as I'll say in a little bit more, one of the reasons that I thought we needed a new name is because of this phenomenon called Puget Sound creep. As we look for time, Puget Sound has been applied to the body of water off of Seattle and even further north. Now, if you look at a map or a chart, I looked at a chart, and if you start off from the north, this is Admiralty Inlet. But then it grades somewhere into Puget Sound in some ambiguous fashion. So there's been the major colonization by Europeans came from the Columbia River, settled mostly around Olympia, moved up to Seattle. So there was this need, really, as the people moved to the north, of taking the name with them, which they did. And I'm totally okay with having this be the boundary of Puget Sound. It makes sense to me, but it wasn't good enough for the state of Washington. And this is what the state of Washington did. There's two ways, and I'll mention that you can name something. One is you go through the bureaucratic process, make the application, get the people involved, or if you're the government, you can just do it. And you can make a governmental decision saying, we are going to cover this. Here's what the legislature of the state of Washington did in the late 80s. It said that all of the marine waters, the inland marine waters of the state of Washington shall be called Puget Sound. Think about that one for a minute. Half of the Strait of Juan de Fuca comes down there, up through the San Juan Islands. Well, we should go back maybe, I won't go back now, but you can get that sense that we have all this stuff up here that is islands, separate bodies of water, Bellingham Bay, that Olympia wants us to call Puget Sound. And in governmental systems they do. Now there was a rationale for that. This was in the late 80s, and the state of Washington was getting pretty excited about fixing up what we'd lost from years of resource extraction. And they said, we need to brand these water to have people become this place with them. It just wasn't a very good decision. I read a paper one time on the ecosystem of the Puget Sound in the Strait of Juan de Fuca. That doesn't make any sense. Names need to make sense. And that one, fortunately, is not got very many advocates. But if you go and look in the law book, you will see that the southern half of the Strait of Juan de Fuca is Puget Sound. Reject it. Not anything good of it. So that's the map. That's the boundaries of the Saley Sea. And let's say, okay, we know where the Saley Sea is. My goodness, there they are already. Why did I want to name the Saley Sea? Let's start with my personal kinds of things. I said I have personal reasons, and then there are scientific reasons. The personal reasons is I was born in Canada. I grew up in the Strait of Georgia, fishing. It's a lot of time in the water. And I'll tell you, things are different now. There's just not much left. This picture is of my mother and father. And I'm not sure whether I was born yet or not, but if I hadn't been, I was soon to come. And this is what we expected at that time. If you go out fishing, you expect to catch fish like this. This is in Jervis Inlet, which is one of the fjords on the eastern side of the Strait of Juan de Fuca. And like a lot of those fjords, they tie into rivers that are very, not violent, but they're vigorous. They're big, heavy running rivers. Takes a big, heavy salmon to go up them. The Elwha is another one of them that we have. There are lots of them around. Campbell River, these fish are gone. Some people, you have enough money and hire a good enough guide and go far enough up the British Columbia coast, there is some chance you'll catch a fish like this. But not on a Saturday morning when you go out fishing. Things are very different. I remember fishing up around Pendra Harbor, which is where my parents were at that time. I caught this huge fish caught onto my line, and I pulled it. It just heavy, heavy, heavy. Pulled it up to the boat, brought it in the boat, and it was a 30 or 35 pound sculpin. Sculpins, those ugly birds with big, I mean, it was probably 30 years old. And herring that were 9 inches long, lots and lots of fish. They're all gone. So that's one of the reasons that I wanted to see a name to reflect a place that we can identify with. And one of the things I would like you to take away in hearing these words is a heightened sense of urgency, that things need to be different than they are, and that we are continuously adjusting our baselines, shifting baselines, accepting what we see as being the normal, and not getting too upset if it gets depreciated a little bit. Think about what it used to be. When you hear about salmon populations, give this one a chance. Okay, so that's my personal reason for wanting to have this name for this body of water. There's also a scientific reason. There's things that I for sure want you to remember about the Saley Sea. One, it's an estuary. Okay, estuaries people mostly know are good things, areas of high, rich biological productivity, and the Saley Sea is a total estuary. It is also an estuarine ecosystem, which means that it acts the component parts act together in a single system. And that system is based in mostly from the Fraser River, coming to the Strait of Georgia, interacting with the rivers causing the estuaries in Puget Sound, and moving out through the Strait of Juan de Fuca. So it's all one part. If it's a system, that's what I was really moved by. If it's an ecosystem, it deserves to be named, because if you can't name it, you can't understand it. Natural resource managers of the time had this Puget Sound, no, Georgia Basin, Puget Sound, Juan de Fuca region. That's what they had to use. I said, let's just call it the Saley Sea. So that was the reason for doing that. As well, I was a little bit offended by Puget Sound creep. I remember in the 80s when we were having community meetings about the oil coming from Alaska into Cherry Point, that somebody came up from the state of Washington, said, you're in northern Puget Sound. There's this tugboat captain who was in the audience, and he got up and said, you know, I've been on these waters 25 years. I've never seen on any chart northern Puget Sound. What are you talking about? That gave me even more confidence. Let's do something about that. All right. So there were reasons then to have a formal name. And there was some little buzz around. I can't remember really the details about how finally I started, but I got interested in what's the process? You want to name something? What do you have to do? And I found out there is a Washington State Board of Geographical Names that has a responsibility for the good keeping of the names in the state of Washington. Part of the Department of Natural Resources. I went down, found their application, filled out the application. I didn't have much time because I was still teaching full time and didn't seem all that important. Sent in the application. This is, gosh, it's so long ago, like 1987, 1988, way back then. And it was summarily dismissed. They sent it out for an application, for a review, small review, and most of the reviews came back saying, experimental name, nobody's using it, doesn't have any value. And it was kind of interesting. They also canvassed the geographers at the Western Washington University that had nothing but scorn for the name at that time, which I like to say now just as a reminder. But enough people found out about it. There were some students who heard about the name. It had an article in the Bellingham Herald, and so there were some people. Oh, we're going to skip that guy. They're gone too. Other things that underscore the problems that we're having in the Saley Sea. Okay, so it came around to this time that I was done with it. One of the students went to Padilla Bay and started an education program that was based on the Saley Sea. Another student went to San Juan Island, started getting engaged with marine resources, said Saley Sea is what we need to do. And there was a woman on her own volition in Salt Spring Island, Bryony Penn, who picked up the name and actually used it in a planning document for the Gulf Islands. So there were a few people around using the name, and it gradually started to get adopted. Probably the greatest group, though, that were using the name is the natural resource managers. There's been a long history of people responsible for natural resources in BC and state of Washington to talk about transboundary issues, what's going on. And that happens every 2 years, still happening. They're called the Saley Sea Conference now. They adopted the Saley Sea name as soon as it got approved. But they would refer to it in their studies because it made sense to those people as well. So there were natural resource managers that were involved, and things had changed in the Washington State Board of Geographical Names in the time that I had been away from it. And the two major changes were that there was more of an emphasis on management of natural resources and an acknowledgement that natural resource areas need names. And the other was more and more recognition that you cannot dismiss tribal and First Nation presence here. So there was becoming more and more an awareness of that. And those, I think, are the two major reasons that the the name was looked at more favorably. And when it was 2009, October 20th, 2009, I've got it 6 years ago, it was approved by the Washington State Board of Geographical Names. Okay, there was one step, though, that had to happen before that I missed. Like I said, there needed to be, in state of Washington, tribal input, and Canada, First Nations input. They don't use the same names, to get their support. And that, if any of you worked in Indian country, know that it's virtually impossible to ever get a response back from a letter. It just doesn't happen. It's not part of the culture. And I discovered this group that was a coalition of First Nations and tribal names, or First Nations and tribal nations, called the Coast Salish. Located in O'Connor, speaks as a unified voice for all the Coast Salish people. And I went down and talked to him and said, I know I'm going to have trouble if I have to get in touch of each of the band leaders. It's just not going to happen. And I said, what can I do? Okay, I'll tell you the real names. the real response, which was just delightful. Charlie O'Hara, which was the resource manager, turned and said, you take care of the white guys. We'll take care of the Indians. Don't worry about it. And that's how it happened. And so the name did get approved in October 30th, 2009. And so coming up to its 7th year? 7-year anniversary coming up the end of this month. Okay, so there was this thing that happened in 2010. I'm going to leave out a little bit of how BC got involved. At this point, I'll come back in a minute. That in 2010, there is the federal group in the state, or in the U.S. It's not a government group. In the United States, there is a group of people who are responsible giving the formal approval to names. The state can do it, but it has to get written off by the formal group. The formal group said fine. They went right along with it within days of the state approving it. And then, though, they also have a name of the year contest. And there is such a thing. So you can go and look at the name of the year. In 2010, the Salish Sea won first prize for name of the year.
Obama got it the year before, so we're in good company.
Yeah. Well, it was even good company the year that Salish Sea got it. Anyone remember what was number 2? Twitter. Anyway, so goes that part of the name. And so BC had to get involved. This is a little interesting twist. They agreed when the Washington State Board of Geographical Names said we're going to do a review. They said, you do the review, we'll help. If you approve it, we'll go along and approve it too. And so Washington approved it. There was a wait. Okay, BC, are you ready? Are you going to say something? Things went dark. Nothing was said. Nobody knew what was going on. And it took about 3 weeks before we got this message that the BC legislature has decided that they will make the decision. And there's a little side story for that, but anyway, they were wanting to make political hay out of it. They were feeling a little badly because they slapped First Nation people in the face a few months earlier about the Salish Sea. And so they waited until the speech from the throne in 2010 to say it will be government business that they will name the Salish Sea. It happened. It got done. And the Canadian federal agency approved it. And it was quite a wonderful celebration in the spring of 2010 at the Songhe First Nation just outside of Victoria. So, name approved. Okay, a little bit, I guess, maybe about why Salish. Could have called it anything. And I have to admit that it was just a stroke of absolute luck that I chose Salish. Because Salish is not a Salish name. The coast, well, first go back one step. If you go all the way around the Salish Sea, almost all of the people there are linked linguistically to Salish groups across the country. The heart of Salish land is in Montana, and the migration probably started there, came north, west, and then north, and then down into the Salish Sea region. But you go on the west coast, the Makahs, they're not Salish. You go north of Campbell River, you're into Kwakiutl country. I still use that old name. So the Salish people, and you go south, down to the Columbia River, you're Chinook people. So the Salish people have a high fidelity to the Salish Sea. And what I didn't realize was that when I went to talk to the Coast Salish Gathering, and they said, don't worry about it, we'll take care of it. They did. They called together a gathering of all of the tribes and First Nations and did a traditional Coast Salish thing. They got a deer hide, put a picture of the Salish Sea, have had everybody sign their names on it, and thereby declared their First Nations and tribal commitment to protecting the Salish Sea as protected as sacred waters. And that happened 2 years before the BC government got around to doing it. So if there's any way of giving credit and the prize to who it is that formally names it first, it goes to the Coast Salish governments. There's over 60 of them, over 60 sovereign nations that are either tribal or First Nation that ring the Salish Sea. Creates an absolute headache now for trying to figure out reasonable methods of governance, but that's a whole nother reason, and a whole nother topic. Okay, all right, so we're doing pretty well. Let's see if I can, we go back. This is sort of a thing. I want to end up trying to reinforce the importance of fostering stewardship, fostering responsible stewardship, and I put this quote on the bottom. It came from a trustee from the Island Trust in Saturna Island. We were having a discussion one night really about getting tribal and First Nation voices involved with developing marine protected areas. He said, look, think of what's happened. And he did this quote which somehow resonates with me. It just seems to describe what we did. That we had, for 150 years we've been partying, and in that time we've trashed the place. Now we're picking up the empties, but we haven't repaired the damage. And that's a fairly accurate place of where we are. We're picking up the empties, trying to clean it up, but we haven't really committed to repairing the number of species that have gone down to, not extinction, some have gone extinct, but that are very, very seriously threatened. And water quality. Puget Sound, if you remember back to the map, Puget Sound is a small area with a large number of people. It's got a greater population density than the Strait of Georgia. And if you want to do a quick measurement of degraded environments, just correlate it with population density. That's all you have to do. High population density, low environmental conditions. Puget Sound is really in trouble. The whole ecosystem is in the process of collapsing. And for those of you that may be asked at some point to spend more of your tax dollars in repairing the damage, I hope you'll all be willing to put up the money, because that is not the only impediment we have for cleanups. There's a lot of science that needs to be done, but it's the greatest impediment, the will of all of us to commit to being good stewards. All right. We're going to leave time for questions, so I'm going to wrap this up. And what I'd like to do is make not a challenge, but a request to you that if you can think of iconic images that in some way reflect the Salish Sea in your mind, I would like to have access to that image. If you'd send it to me, I'll make sure it goes into a bank of iconic images. And this is the one that I have. What could be more iconic than that? We have got two of our iconic images right there. But this is all involved around, I start with responsible stewardship, fostering responsible stewardship. And responsible is a code word. It's in the mission of our institute because of, not the insistence, but the suggestion of tribal voices. Responsibility means every person individually accepts a responsibility to appreciate and sustain the gifts of Mother Nature. And so to foster responsible stewardship means that in some way or another you have to be responsible in your actions for making things better. And part of that responsibility comes with developing a sense of place. How many of you were born on the shores of the Saley Sea? How many not? Look at all the immigrants. Should we build a wall? But there is that question. You know, when I was 5 years old, I spent my summers in White Rock, and I sat on the beach looking out at these mysterious islands to the south and wondered what was on the other side of them. That and my experiences in Georgia Strait are indelibly etched in my mind. Those are my iconic memories and iconic places and iconic events that connect me to this place. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have looking at the distribution of the audience is how do we connect with this place and accept it as our place and become stewards of that place. I'm not quite sure how to do that, especially for people who live in high-rises their whole life. Here's one. I was down at the Seattle Public Aquarium a little while ago. They're going to be doing a big expansion in the next 5 years and doing strategic planning with them. And one of the staff members said, they have to be a little bit careful here. That person said that 30% of the people in Puget Sound think the Puget Sound is fresh water. Yeah. Don't quote me on that, though. I should really check it out before. But I did hear that, so the person said that. The level of not lack of understanding with whether it be the let's see if I can get up here. Okay. The lack of understanding is this thing as a place. There's one thing I missed when I talked about the Strait of Juan de Fuca, Georgia Strait, and Puget Sound. People say, okay, you're talking about the Saley Sea. Does that include us? Because we live on the shoreline. And if you think about it, where does all the damage come from? It comes from those of us that live on the shoreline. So if you're thinking about the Saley Sea as an ecosystem, it makes total sense to include the watershed. And Stefan here has drawn a watershed line around the Saley Sea. And really, that's our area that needs to be protected. We have to be responsible for what goes on. The First Nations and tribal people say, from the white caps to the ice caps, that's our home. And that, I think, makes a lot of sense. There is one little note here. Stefan, I keep trying to tell you about this, and I just have to do it now. These are rivers that all are within the watersheds of the Cascades. All the waters come from here, except for this one big major river, the Fraser River. It goes up here, and actually you can see its path. But I'm not sure what to do with the watershed of the Fraser River, because the watershed of the Fraser River is bigger than the state of Washington. It's huge. All these other watersheds are small and manageable, but the Fraser is mammoth in its own way. And how we deal with the Fraser River conceptually for land use and conservation and sustainability, nobody's quite figured out yet. And we should probably, Stefan, to be totally accurate, break the line here where the Fraser River goes through, so people can have a little sense that there isn't a closed system on that part. Okay, so I think that's enough for me. So how about questions? Have I left everybody totally confused?
Awestruck.
Yeah, speechless. One other thing. So the period between the first application that went in and the second application, the quiet period, and I did mention there were some people that took on providing some kind of space for the CDC to be used. And I have a friend who was the first person to name his boat the Saley Sea. Now there are dozens of them. I mean, they're all over the place, dozens and dozens. But Hal Thurston, who's sitting here, because he's one of the ones that had to come, named the first person who named the Saley Sea, and was part of that gradual effort to get people thinking about it. So, thank you, Hal.
I was honored.
All right.
Bert, just quick, I was talking about maps. Can I add, I think, three points to that map?
Please.
So, 1 and 2 are that when you came to me asked for the map, the first thing you said was you wanted a map that didn't have a line going through it. And so if you look at, I mean, it's very difficult to find, you know, there's 2 unusual things about that map. One is it doesn't have a border, so the ecosystem is not cut in half. And your problem was you just wanted a map to be able to talk about it, and you couldn't find a single map that didn't have a line through it. The second was you asked me to not show any of the cities, which is an odd thing for a map. You know, that it just, your focus was really on the ecosystem. And almost every map you see of the area has highways and railroads, and so part of my work was removing stuff rather than adding stuff. But the third thing was, once we started talking about it, we got to the idea of using the map as a piece of propaganda. And so my response was, I can make you a black and white map, but let's make it pretty, or try to. And you went out and then, I don't know, how many copies do you think you printed up of that thing?
I don't know, 300 or 400.
Well, I think it's double that.
I
used to print them for you.
I'm embarrassed to say, because you did the most.
Yeah, there were a lot of maps that got handed out, and so it was an interesting process of using, you know, again, that power of maps and of to name something and to give it an identity and iconic. That was, you know, overtly part of the process of making that piece of cartography.
And I would like to make it interactive. I would very much like to be able to push a button and have the border come. Because there are times at which you say, this is the way it is, and now look at it with the border there.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, there's a lot of things like that.
Yeah,
but
sure.
You've got more classes, don't you?
Leave that on there.
Thanks, David. Rob.
I'm going to take advantage of my position here and talk like a librarian for a minute. If you go to Google and type in Cedar and WW Library, you'll find that we have an institutional repository here in the library where we put all the scholarship of faculty and some of students. And one of the things we have in there is all the papers of the Salish Sea Ecosystem Conferences. And if you go to the Cedar page, you can see people all over the world. We have a map on it, funny thing. And you can watch, it's a kind of a slow video game. You can watch as people all over the world download maps, and it's amazing how many of them come up from Salish, the Salish Sea Ecosystem Conference. Cedar. Sorry.
Yeah, so I'm really taken by this idea and really appreciate the work that you're doing in collaboration with others. And I work with the Center for Service Learning here, and we talk a lot about citizenship. And something that this makes me think about is like reimagining or rethinking citizenship. So especially when we don't see that 49th parallel, for example. But I'm curious about what you think the implications are for developing a more regional sense of place around the Salish Sea in terms of people thinking about being citizens of the Salish Sea and therefore being able to vote, for example, on initiatives that are going to affect the Salish Sea, what that would mean when we're in different jurisdictions all over the place here, and how we can maybe form more democratic processes to be able to participate in thinking about it as citizens.
I think it's the paramount issue that is unresolved at this point. But when you think about models, you always have to remember that there's over 60 sovereign nations, each with a legal right to some part of the Saley Sea. And that is overwhelming. I don't know, we'll figure it out somehow. No.
For size and complexity and number of people on its shoreline, is this a large, medium-sized, or small assemblage?
I go for medium. Yeah.
Around the world, there are many like it, I know.
Yeah.
You have sense of scale.
And you can have them stacked, like the Mediterranean Sea has a dozen seas that are subsidiary to the Mediterranean. So I don't know if there's any strict convention. I don't think so. And it's a medium size. There are bigger ones and smaller ones. Over here, somebody poked up their hand.
It's very difficult to come up with a definition of sea. If you ask geographers, what is a sea? Because I did this. And there's not a good answer. You'd think that would be something we would have defined. So Gulf and Bay, things like that have it, but there are some seas that have multiple openings, or basically straits or channels almost, and others that are more like bays. And there are some, there are freshwater seas, there are saltwater seas, there are much larger, there are much smaller. But there was a various backlash to the idea of a name, and one of them was, you can't call it a sea, it's too big or too small, depending on who you ask.
That's true. And then there's seas that aren't even connected to any other body of water.
Right, 7 seas, what are those? Yeah. So basically a sea is whatever you want to call a sea.
Good.
They're generally wet.
Or wet.
Yes.
So one of my questions was, in terms of environmental effects, sorry, I'm sick, where have you seen the most improvement, and what areas do you think still need the most work?
Where's the most improvement? I think cleaning up Bellingham. We could take Bellingham as an example of the most improvement kind of thing, of taking the contaminated areas and redoing them. There's a downside because all that land that we're developing now is really it's Lummi land. They never gave it up, and we're not about to give it up. So there's those little twisted things, but in terms of cleanup, it's made a huge difference. Since 1970, in sewage too, I used to take my classes in 1970 down to what's now called Marine Park, and there was a pipe that served all of South Bellingham, came down through the intertidal zone. At low tide, you could stand on top of that pipe, look in the hole, and it was untreated sewage, just see what was going out. And we don't do that anymore. But there's still lots to, that's picking up one of the empties.
I have a question. Does the word Salish mean something?
Salish, thanks Kathy, that's something I forgot to talk about. It simply means that you are connected linguistically to a body of languages. There are many different dialects, so people can speak languages they can't understand, but they all have this affinity that connects back. And some people dismiss it as being unreal. But the Salish people are totally in favor of it. And I was really lucky that was the case. It's a European name. Europeans couldn't figure out the proper pronunciation of whatever it is that people were trying to tell them, so they used Salish. And if it had been a traditional name, it would have been private property, because names are privately owned, and you can't use them unless you have permission. And that's a really big deal in tribes and First Nations. So I was really lucky. If I'd picked the wrong one, it would have been game over right then.
You mentioned in passing the Salish Sea Institute. Can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Western has developed a Salish Sea Studies Institute. It's 1 year old now, still developing programs, which a program that is Western's outreach to the this is my number one thing. Western's outreach to the community to do what we can do to be responsible stewards. So to work with government agencies, to work with community groups, to work with K through 12 groups to promote a better understanding of our place. That's number one. Number two, to foster research. Lots of things are unknown about it. Like the big frontier right now, at least in Puget Sound, are all the personal care products that make their way through the sewage system and show up in biosystems. Old drugs, deodorants, all the whole bit. What to do about those, we have no idea what they're doing. So there's that issue of science, and then classes to engage students. And already I'm pleased, I didn't know, is anybody here from Students for Salish Sea? Yes. Okay, there's a new group on campus. If you are at all interested in Salish Sea, want to develop your stewardship, look up the Salish Students for Salish Sea at Western Washington University and get involved.
I just wanted to clarify, what was Western Washington do that connection to the naming of the Salish Sea, or were you seniors, or I wanted to clarify what?
Yes, yeah, I came to Western in 1970 as part of the first faculty of Huxley College. And we've always had an emphasis on thinking outside the box, of interdisciplinary studies and thinking across disciplinary boundaries. And I've always thought that Western provided an academic environment for me to think about things that otherwise I never would have. So I think, to a large point, the credit goes to Western for having an academic environment that allowed that to happen.
Maybe bigger than the scope, but still of concern is the sewage from Vancouver Island is still dumped. And is there any way you're seeing any movement on that since you've joined this BC and Washington group?
Victoria is now in the process of deciding how to spend $1 billion to deal with it.
Bigger pipe?
Well, it's unsure. It could be a bigger pipe. I think the worst thing they could do is take it out into deep water. Yeah. The best thing they could do is just leave things the way they are and spend money to make sure that the waste stream going into the Strait of Juan de Fuca is free of toxins. If you look at it, it's a perfect place. The surface waters there are going out to the ocean continuously. There's nothing in clean sewage that Mother Nature has got really offensive about. If we could do that, that's what I'd do. It's not going to happen. But so we're going to have to collect all the poisons in one spot, treat them, and do them. But I'm even more worried about Seattle. Seattle still allowed storm overflows and are not going to do anything about it for another 20 years. And the Puget Sound area down there is much more at risk than Victoria, is in my thinking. And they're not cleaning it up.
Define storm overflows.
Oh yeah, so in big rain events, it overwhelms the capacity of the sewage treatment systems to deal with it, so they just flush it into the nearest waterway. And that's permitted. Seattle can do that. They don't have to deal with all of their stuff.
And it doesn't flush like Victoria does.
Yeah, so it contaminates more. Okay.
I have one more really dumb technical question. Would you consider Hood Canal to be part of the Salish Sea?
I do, although I wouldn't consider it part of Puget Sound. It's a different system. Hood Canal is the one genuine glacial formed trough that we have in the Puget Sound region. And they're characterized by the ice coming down and plowing a big mass of sediments in front of them and then receding back and leaving a dam. So you get out by the Hood Canal Bridge, there's a sill, and that sill prevents deep water from entering in and flushing out the body of water. But that's similar. There's a lot of places up the BC coast that have fjords in that way. So it's a fjord system. It's not in the same way as Puget Sound. So yeah, it's part of the same sea.
Thank you.
Is the Duwamish where a lot of that overflow runs, or where did they put it?
Into the rivers? Yeah, I can't remember. I just heard it one time in the news, and I don't remember.
But does it go to the rivers or directly, like?
I think some direct and some into the rivers. The Duwamish get some. No swimming when that happens. Yes.
On a shorter term scale, you're talking about how things that you'd like to get done can't even happen in the next 20 years. Ideally, what about the next 5 years? Is there anything that you'd like to see change in that time?
You know, I think there will be a better understanding. Right now, trying to understand the Salish Sea estuarine ecosystem is handicapped because of the political boundary. that the science efforts on both sides are just different enough that you can't compare the data from one side to the other. And the number one task is to go through and harmonize those data sets so that they can be compared and we can get a picture of what the conditions are now. And I think that's going to be probably the most important changes. And at identifying stressors for climate change, a stressor is something that makes things worse than what we want them to be. And we know that climate change is going to be a stressor, but we don't know really on what systems and how. So I think that in the next 5 years will also be a big one. And yeah. And Aquila is back here. She's working on Aquila Flower from Huxley is starting the first entry into the Encyclopedia of the Saley Sea, which does exactly what I say. Get data sets, harmonize them so you can compare them on both sides, put them on a geospatial platform so they can be examined quite easily, and then at least you have a sense of what the system is like at this point.
Thank you.
I have one question. I'm going to be really dumb here. What's an estuary?
No, it's not really dumb. An estuary is a body of salt water that is measurably diluted by water from freshwater drainage. And it's a tricky one in the Saley Sea because we don't have a uniform gradation of freshwater to saltwater because we have all these tides in places like Harrow Strait and Rosario Strait called the washing machines, where it'll take whatever water's in that body and mix it from top to bottom. So the deep water that comes into Bellingham Bay is, what the oceanographers say, 29 parts per thousand, 2.9% fresh water. And when it gets to going out the Strait of Juan Fuca, it's 3.1%, and the ocean water is 3.3 or 3.4. But it's still measurable, so it counts as an estuary. And it's what the estuary does